Silas learned early that silence could feel heavier than noise, especially when it was broken by the sound of someone who should not be there. The snap of wood outside his supply shed made his hand freeze mid-motion, a sack of grain half lifted, his breath held as if the land itself were listening. He had been alone for so long that the ranch felt like an extension of his body, every creak, every shift of wind familiar. Since his father's death, days passed without conversation, marked only by chores and the slow movement of the sun. Morning meant mending fences. Evening meant eating in quiet. Night meant lying awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying words his father never finished saying. Solitude had become his armor, heavy but dependable. The sound came again, careful, intentional. Silas set the grain down and stepped outside, the light sharp and pale against the wide land. The wilderness pressed close to the ranch, tall grass bending under a steady breeze. Near the shed, a figure crouched low, dark hair pulled back, hands already gripping a bundle of dried meat. She moved with the awareness of someone who expected danger, every muscle ready. She was not a boy looking for scraps. She was not lost. She looked up and met his eyes without flinching. Silas felt the old reflex rise in him, the instinct his father had drilled in during lean years. Protect what's yours. Ask questions later. His hand hovered near his side, but he did not move closer. Something in her expression stopped him. It wasn't fear. It was resolve mixed with exhaustion, the look of someone who had already endured too much to beg. They stayed that way for a long moment, the space between them filled with unspoken calculations. The woman straightened slowly, not backing away, not advancing. She was lean, strong, marked by long days under open sky. Her clothes were worn but carefully kept. She looked like someone who belonged to the land more than the buildings behind him ever did. Silas swallowed. "You don't have to run," he said, his voice rough from lack of use. She tilted her head slightly, as if measuring the truth in his words. Her eyes flicked once to the open fields, then back to him. When she spoke, her voice was low, accented but steady. "I will not take more." The simplicity of the sentence struck him. No excuses, no lies. He nodded once. The tension in his shoulders eased, though his heart still beat too fast. "You're hungry." She did not deny it. Silas stepped past her, opened the shed wider, and reached inside. He pulled out dried beans, flour, and another bundle of meat, setting them on the crate between them. He kept his movements slow, deliberate, as if sudden motion might shatter something fragile. "For the road," he said. Her eyes narrowed, not with suspicion, but with something closer to confusion. She hesitated before taking the food, her fingers brushing the rough wood of the crate. When she looked up again, something in her gaze softened, just enough to reveal the weight she carried. "Why?" she asked. Silas searched for an answer and found none that fit cleanly. Because he remembered being hungry, because loneliness had taught him that survival without kindness felt empty. Because when his father died, the neighbors had brought bread without being asked. "Because you asked for nothing," he said finally. She studied him as if committing his face to memory. "My name is Nakoha," she said after a pause. Silas nodded. Silas. The exchange felt heavier than it should have, as if names carried promises neither of them was ready to make. Nakoha gathered the supplies, tying them securely. She lingered, her gaze drifting toward the house, the corral, the quiet yard that spoke of a life reduced to essentials. "You live alone," she said. "Yes." "Why?" The question landed deeper than expected. Silas looked past her, toward the hills where his father used to ride at dusk, checking fences that no longer needed checking. "It's simpler," he said. Nakoha's mouth curved faintly, not quite a smile. "Simple does not mean empty," she replied, though her eyes suggested she knew the difference. She stepped back, giving him space, then another step. Before turning away, she paused. "You showed mercy today," she said. "That has a cost." Silas watched her disappear into the tall grass, her presence swallowed by the land as quietly as it had arrived. The yard felt different after she left, the silence sharper, less forgiving. He stood there long after she was gone, aware of a change he could not name. For the first time since his father's passing, the quiet did not feel like protection. It felt like a question, and he knew, deep down, that he had already answered it by choosing compassion over fear. Silas noticed her before he expected to, not by sight at first, but by the change in how the land felt. The mornings no longer passed in the same dull rhythm. While repairing a fence near the edge of his property, he felt watched, not in a threatening way, but with a quiet awareness that raised the hairs on his neck. When he looked up, he saw her standing near the tree line, far enough away to leave if she wanted, close enough to be seen. Nakoha did not approach. She waited. Silas leaned on the fence post, unsure whether to wave or pretend he hadn't noticed her. In the end, he did neither. He simply stayed where he was. After a long moment, she turned and disappeared into the brush. The encounter left him unsettled in a way he could not explain. He went back to his work, but his focus was gone. She returned 2 days later, this time closer. Silas was feeding the horses when he sensed movement near the pasture fence. Nakoha stood there with her hands resting on the top rail, her posture calm but alert. She looked healthier than the last time he had seen her, though her eyes still carried the weight of someone who slept lightly. "You came back," Silas said, surprised at how natural it felt to speak. "I told you mercy has a cost," she replied. "I wanted to see what kind of man pays it." He considered that. "And?" She shrugged slightly. "You are still here." So was she, he thought, but he didn't say it. Over the next week, her visits became part of the landscape. She never crossed an invisible line without invitation. Sometimes she watched from a distance while Silas worked. Other times, she stood close enough to speak, asking simple questions about the animals, the fences, the land. Silas found himself answering more than he intended. He spoke about the seasons, about how the ground held water better near the creek, about his father teaching him which repairs could wait and which could not. Nakoha listened without interrupting. When she did speak, it was with care. She told him she had once lived among many voices and now preferred quiet. She did not explain why. Silas did not press her. The silence between them felt shared, not empty. One afternoon, clouds gathered low and gray, and Silas invited her to sit near the barn to stay out of the wind. They sat a few feet apart, the distance deliberate. The smell of hay and leather filled the air. For a long time, neither spoke. "My husband is gone," Nakoha said at last, her eyes fixed on the open field. "He was strong. He believed in duty." Silas waited. "When he died," she continued, "I was expected to fill the space he left behind. Not with grief, with obedience." Silas felt something tighten in his chest. He understood duty. He had lived under it his entire life. "And you didn't want that," he said. "I wanted to choose," she replied. Her voice did not shake, but her hands clenched briefly in her lap. He nodded, feeling the weight of her words settle into him. "My father believed a man's worth was measured by how much he could endure without complaint," Silas said. "I tried to live that way. I'm not sure it helped." Nakoha looked at him then. Really looked at him. "You are alone," she said, not as an accusation, but as a statement of fact. "Yes. Does it hurt?" The question caught him off guard. Silas opened his mouth, then closed it. "I don't know anymore," he admitted. "I got used to it." She turned her gaze back to the horizon. Getting used to something does not make it right. Their closeness felt different after that. Not lighter, but more honest. When their hands brushed by accident as he passed her a canteen, neither pulled away immediately. The moment lingered, quiet and charged, before they both moved back, aware of a line they were not ready to cross. As days passed, Silas began to look for her without meaning to. He noticed how empty the fence line felt when she was not there. He caught himself listening for her steps, her voice. At night, he lay awake, thinking about the way she watched the land, always measuring distance and risk. Nakoha, too, seemed restless. She scanned the horizon more often now, her body tensing at distant sounds. Once, she asked Silas how far the nearest settlement was. Another time, she asked what he would do if someone came looking for her. "I don't know," he said honestly. She accepted the answer, but her eyes told him she was preparing for something neither of them had named yet. The attraction between them grew, slow and restrained, shaped by caution rather than desire. It lived in shared glances, unfinished sentences, and the space they chose not to close. Both of them understood, without saying it, that what they were building could not remain untouched by the world beyond the ranch. And somewhere beyond the open land, forces were already moving, turning quiet moments into borrowed time. Night fell unevenly, as if the darkness itself hesitated before settling over the ranch. Silas was inside the house, rinsing a tin cup at the sink, when he sensed it, an unease that had nothing to do with weather or fatigue. The horses shifted in the corral, restless in a way he had learned not to ignore. Then came a distant sound, faint but steady, carried on the wind. Footsteps. Not one pair. Several. Silas stepped onto the porch and scanned the open land. At first he saw nothing. Then, near the far edge of the yard, a shadow moved where no shadow should have been. Another followed. His pulse quickened, not with panic, but with clarity. This was not chance. Someone was coming with purpose. He turned just as Nakoha emerged from the darkness near the barn. She moved quickly, her face tight, her eyes sharp. "They are close," she said. "I should not have stayed." Silas opened his mouth to argue, then stopped. This was not the time for comfort or blame. "Inside," he said. "Now." She hesitated only a second before following him into the house. Silas barred the door and motioned toward the small cellar beneath the kitchen floor. It was little more than a storage space, barely tall enough to crouch in, but it was hidden. He lifted the hatch, and cool air rose up to meet them. Nakoha climbed down first, her movements controlled despite the tension. Silas followed, pulling the hatch closed above them. Darkness wrapped around them, broken only by a thin line of light through the cracks in the wood. They waited. The sounds outside grew clearer, voices low, deliberate, speaking a language Silas did not understand, but could feel the weight of. He held his breath, every muscle rigid. In the cramped space, he was keenly aware of Nakoha beside him, the quiet steadiness of her presence even as danger pressed in. Her hand brushed his arm, not by accident. "They are my people," she whispered. "They will not leave easily." Silas swallowed. "What do they want?" She was silent for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was barely audible. "They want to take back what they believe is theirs." The words struck him harder than the threat outside. He had assumed pursuit, anger, maybe pride. Ownership was something else entirely. Above them, footsteps crossed the porch. Someone tested the door. Another voice answered, calm, patient. Silas felt a flicker of anger rise in him, sharp and unexpected. He thought of his father, of how the land had nearly been taken from them after a bad season, how close they had come to losing everything to men who spoke politely while holding power. In the cellar, time stretched. Nakoha shifted closer, her shoulder pressing lightly against his. In that closeness, memory surfaced unbidden. Silas remembered being a boy, hiding under the bed while his father argued with strangers in the yard, their voices low but firm. He remembered the fear and the shame of staying silent. "I will not go back," Nakoha whispered, her voice steady but filled with resolve. If I do, my life will not be my own. Silas closed his eyes. The choice formed in him before he could speak it aloud. He could stay hidden, let them search, let fate decide. Or he could act, knowing the cost might be more than he was prepared to pay. A loud knock echoed through the house. The voices paused. Nakoha's fingers tightened briefly around his sleeve. Not a plea, a warning. Silas opened the hatch. Cool night air rushed in. He climbed out, his heart pounding so hard it felt like it might give him away. He stepped onto the porch, lantern in hand, and raised it just enough to cast light across the yard. Figures stood near the fence, their posture calm, their presence unmistakable. One stepped forward, his expression composed, his gaze sharp but not hostile. He spoke slowly, as if choosing words meant to be understood. "We are looking for someone," the man said. "She belongs with us." Silas held the lantern steady, though his arm ached. "No one belongs to anyone here," he replied. The man studied him, then glanced toward the house. "This does not concern you." Silas felt the truth of that statement and rejected it. He thought of the cellar, of the woman below his feet who had trusted him enough to hide. He thought of the man he had been, and the man he could no longer pretend to be. "It concerns me," Silas said, "because she chose to be here." Silence followed, thick and heavy. The lantern light flickered, casting long shadows that stretched toward the trees. Behind Silas, unseen, Nakoha listened, her future balanced on words spoken above her. And in that moment, the quiet ranch became something else entirely. Not a refuge from the world, but the place where a choice would be made that could not be undone. The air felt tighter than before, as if the land itself were holding its breath. The men did not leave after Silas spoke. Instead, more shapes appeared at the edge of the trees, each holding a small flame that pushed back the dark. The soft glow spread across the yard, steady and controlled, not rushed. This was not chaos. It was intention. Silas stood his ground, his boots planted in the dirt he had worked for years. His heart was pounding, but his voice did not shake. He knew now that stepping back would be easier, but it would also follow him for the rest of his life. From the shadows, another man stepped forward. He was taller than the rest, his posture straight, his face marked by age and authority. When he spoke, his voice carried weight. "Brother," he said calmly, looking past Silas toward the house, "you can come out now. This does not need to become something it should not." Nakoha emerged slowly from the doorway, her shoulders back, her face composed. She moved to stand beside Silas, not behind him. The torchlight revealed her clearly, and a low murmur moved through the group. The man's eyes softened when he saw her. "You have been gone too long," he said. "Our people worry." Nakoha met his gaze without lowering her own. "They worry because I did not accept what was chosen for me," she replied. "It was chosen to protect you," he said, "to keep you within the tribe." "To keep me silent," she answered. The space between them filled with words unspoken. Silas felt the weight of history pressing in, of bonds that existed long before he ever set foot on this land. He understood then that this was not a simple demand. It was a struggle between tradition and will. "You belong with us," the man said again, his tone patient, almost gentle. "Come back, and this ends peacefully." Nakoha looked at Silas just once. In that glance was gratitude, fear, and something deeper, trust. Then she turned back to her brother. "I will not return to a life where my voice does not matter," she said. "I choose my own path." A murmur rose, sharper this time. The flames flickered as the men shifted their stance. The man's jaw tightened. "You would choose exile?" he asked. "You would give up everything you know?" "I already have," Nakoha replied. Silas felt something break open inside him. He stepped forward, placing himself fully between Nakoha and the group. "She made her choice," he said, "and I stand by it." The man studied Silas closely now. You understand what you are doing? He asked. This choice will follow you. Silas nodded. I do. The wind moved through the yard, carrying the smell of smoke and earth. Time seemed to slow, each second heavy with consequence. Finally, the man raised a hand, signaling the others to lower their flames. This land is not ours, he said quietly, but she is of us. His gaze returned to Nakoha. If you stay, you do so knowing you cannot return as you were. Nakoha straightened. I know. The man held her gaze for a long moment, then nodded once. Then you walk your path alone. One by one, the men stepped back. The flames turned away, retreating toward the trees. The yard grew darker, quieter, until only the night remained. Silas exhaled slowly, realizing he had been holding his breath. His legs felt weak, but he did not move until the last light disappeared. Nakoha stood beside him, her face calm, though her eyes reflected the cost of what she had chosen. It is done, she said. Yes, Silas replied. It is. They stood together in the silence that followed, aware that nothing could return to how it was before. Safety had been traded for truth, comfort for freedom. As they turned back toward the house, the ranch no longer felt like a place of hiding. It felt like a line that had been crossed, and a future that would demand courage every day from that moment on. Morning came without ceremony. No warning, no sense of victory. The ranch looked the same as it always had, quiet and wide, the fences still leaning in familiar places, the corral dust undisturbed. Yet Silas felt the difference the moment he stepped outside. The land no longer felt like a shelter from the world. It felt like a responsibility. Nakoha was already awake. She stood near the corral, brushing one of the horses with slow, careful strokes. Her movements were steady, but there was a distance in her eyes, as if part of her was still walking away from the firelight of the night before. Silas watched her for a moment before joining her. They are gone, he said, not as reassurance, but as fact. She nodded. They will not return. Silas accepted that without question. Some choices closed doors forever. The days that followed settled into a new rhythm. Nakoha did not linger as a guest. She worked beside Silas, learning the routines of the ranch, not because he asked, but because she chose to. She repaired fences with him, her hands sure and capable. She learned the horses' temperaments, the way each one responded to touch and voice. In the garden behind the house, she planted seeds she carried with her, small and carefully wrapped, pressing them into the soil as if anchoring herself to the land. Silas found himself changing without effort. He spoke more. He listened more. The habits built from years of solitude began to loosen their hold. He noticed how he stood straighter, how his voice carried further than it used to. Courage, he realized, was not a single act. It was a daily practice. Some evenings, they sat on the porch as the sun sank low, sharing quiet without the weight it once carried. They spoke of practical things: weather, repairs, the coming seasons. Other times, silence said more than words could. There was no rush to define what they were building. It was enough that it was chosen, not imposed. Nakoha still rose early, scanning the horizon out of habit. Exile was not something that faded quickly, yet over time, the tension in her shoulders eased. Laughter, rare at first, began to surface in small moments. When a horse refused to cooperate, when the wind scattered seed she had just planted. Each sound of it felt like a claim on the future. One afternoon, Silas caught his reflection in the window and barely recognized the man staring back. He saw someone grounded, someone no longer waiting for life to pass quietly. His father's words returned to him, reshaped by time. A man's worth was not in how much he endured, but in what he chose to protect. The ranch became a place of shared purpose. The corral was reinforced. The house repaired where age had worn it thin. The garden grew, green against the dry land, proof that care could change even the harshest ground. There were still risks. The frontier did not soften its edges simply because courage had been shown once. Silas knew that. Nakoha knew it too. But fear no longer ruled their decisions. It stood beside them, acknowledged, no longer in control. One evening, as the sky burned orange and gold, Nakoha joined Silas at the fence line. She rested her hands on the weathered wood, looking out over the land that was now, by choice, her home. "I did not think freedom would feel this quiet," she said. Silas smiled faintly. "I didn't think it would feel this full." They stood together, not bound by promises spoken aloud, but by the weight of what they had already risked. Their life was not perfect. It was real, built from work, respect, and the courage to choose each other again and again. As darkness settled, the ranch lights flickered on, small but steady against the vast night. And somewhere beyond the fences, the world continued on, unchanged. But here on this stretch of land, two people had drawn a line, not in anger, but in hope, and decided that freedom, once chosen, was worth protecting, no matter the cost.